Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little, and today we're going to be discussing using aggression to win at poker. I think everyone knows you need to generally be aggressive. You generally need to be looking to pick up pots that don't belong to you, because if you only win the pots that belong to you or you have the best hand, well, that's not going to work so well because you're actually not going to win all of those. I mean, as an easy example, say you raise with ace-7 and the big blind calls with, 4-2, and it comes any board without an ace, a 7, a 4, or 2. If it goes check on the flop and then your opponent just bluffs you on the turn, you fold. Your opponent wins with the worst hand, so you don't get to realize your equity when you have the best hand if you end up playing very tightly and very straightforwardly. Also, sometimes you're going to make the second best hand that's still pretty good. Like say it comes 8-7-7 when you have ace-7 and your opponent has pocket ace or 8-7. Well, now you're just going to lose tons of money, right? So in general, the idea of I'm just going to play tight, straightforward poker only works if your opponents are really, really bad. Now, you all know that I'm not teaching you to try to win at the tiniest stakes. I'm trying to teach you all to win a life-changing amount of money in a manner that is sustainable long-term, right? We're not trying to get rich quick here. We're trying to actually get good and learn fundamentally sound poker. So, in order to make a lot of money, you have to be able to play for at least reasonably high stakes, which means your opponents are not going to be terrible. They're just not. You cannot bank on your opponents making ridiculous mistakes all the time, as maybe you can in the very smallest stakes games. So let's go through a few quick tips to help you use aggression to win more pots that don't belong to you. First things first, you need to be 3-betting with a polarized range in almost all scenarios. So, first, there are two different types of ranges that you'll often find pre-flop when you're the aggressor. Either you're going to be 3-betting with a linear range, which are the hands here for lesser value, as you see, just like ace-10 suited, ace-jack offsuit, pocket eights, or you can be 3-betting with a polarized range, which are the best hands here, and then some junky hands, right? That are not quite good enough to call. So think about what happens whenever your opponent raises and you 3-bet. A 3-bet just means to put in the third pre-flop bet. This is a term that's confusing to some because they haven't been around poker as long as I have. I'm ancient at this point. This comes from limit hold'em, where the first bet is the blind, the second bet is the pre-flop raise, and then the third bet is the re-raise, right? So whenever someone raises, that's the second bet. You're making the third bet. You are 3-betting. You are re-raising. So whenever someone raises and you re-raise, when you have pocket nines and they decide to re-raise back, they 4-bet you, what happens? Well, nines are in pretty terrible shape because your opponent's going to show up with one of these hands in red most of the time. And you don't really want to fold your pocket nines, right? You'd much rather see a flop in position or even out of position with pocket nines than have to fold it before the flop. So you don't really want to be re-raising that. What happens if you re-raise 7-5 suited and your opponent 4-bets you? Well, that's fine because 7-5 suited is pretty bad. Also, notice if you do re-raise your opponent with 7-5 suited and they call, what are they usually going to have? Well, they're usually going to have a lot of big cards, right? Like king, queen, king, jack, ace, 9, stuff like that. And 7-5 suited is drawing pretty live against those hands, right? So it turns out you're very rarely dominated whenever you're 3-betting these low junky hands. And when you're 3-betting with ace-5 suited, the fact that you have an ace in your hand makes it harder for your opponent to have a continuing hand, right? It's way more difficult to have pocket aces or ace-king when you know that there's an ace that cannot be in your opponent's hand. This is referred to as a blocker. So you see the bluffs in a polarized 3-betting range, the green hands, either have a lot of equity when you get called, they fall well under your opponent's calling range, or they have a blocker. A king is a blocker, a jack is a blocker, a 10 is kind of a blocker, but an ace really is the most important blocker. And then you also, using either of these strategies, you 3-bet with your best hands, and that's just purely for value, right? It is worth mentioning whenever you use this strategy, a lot of these hands between the green hands and the blue hands are going to be called, like king, queen suited. Like king, queen suited would be a call in a polarized 3-betting range, and 10-9 suited would be a call, and 9-7 suited would be a call, probably. You typically want to 3-bet the hands that are not quite good enough to call. This may be surprising to some of you to see like ace-10 offsuit is not quite good enough to call, but really, very often it's not. You'd much rather use that as a bluff. Using this strategy will work very well against everyone besides players who are extreme calling stations. If they're going to call your re-raise with, queen-8 suited, then yeah, you probably want to be re-raising with the queen-jack suited because then you're going to be dominating them a lot. But again, as you move up, players are going to be way more likely to start 4-betting you. And when they're going to be 4-betting you more, you want to make sure the hands that you fold as your bluffs don't actually have a ton of value. Like whenever you 3-bet ace-10 offsuit and they 4-bet you, if it's one of these hands in red, as you see ace-10 offsuit is just crushed, right? And that's fine. Before we move on, if you all like this video, if you're enjoying this type of content, click like, click subscribe. That would let me know that you enjoy what we're doing here. All right, next, continuation bet more often when you're playing heads up. Don't get carried away, but in general, most people play a little bit too straightforwardly on the flop. They fold a little bit too often, and you're gonna find that if you continuation bet frequently, especially using a small sizing, that's gonna be very, very beneficial for you. I actually have a video already on YouTube called When to Continuation Bet and How Much. I definitely suggest you go check that out. That will give a good, fundamentally sound strategy for when to continuation bet and how much to continuation bet. But as a default statement, if you continuation bet 1/3 pot into one player heads up, they're not going to defend nearly often enough in general, and they're going to fold more often than they should, which means you're going to be winning way more of the small pots than you should be allowed to. Now, when you do continuation bet the flop for a small amount, you should expect to get called a decent amount. Okay, so what happens? That means your opponent is going to get to the turn with a relatively wide range, which you may be able to continue bluffing on the turn, right? You want to keep betting with especially all of your hands that have no showdown value if you know your opponent's getting to the turn with a lot of ace highs and bottom pairs. So when you do bet the flop, you need to be willing to bet the turn. Most people are not going to expect you to be bluffing the turn too often, though, because they know that they play very straightforwardly, and they assume that you're going to play very straightforwardly on the turn and the river as well. And if instead you're bluffing like a maniac and they don't expect it, they're going to end up folding way too often to you, which again lets you win lots of hands that do not belong to you. So finally, you need to study. You need to work hard. You need to understand the math behind the game. And we teach all of this over at pokercoaching.com. I have made it to where you can get a completely free trial. No credit card is required. Go there, sign up, study a lot, and you will see all sorts of spots where you can pick up the pot just by using almost blind aggression. I know very few situations in poker really are that easy, but if your opponents fold too often, as a lot of players will, especially if you start using smaller bet sizes where your bluffs don't need to succeed all that often, the money's just going to fall right into your lap over time if you put in a lot of volume. So that's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoy it. Again, go to pokercoaching.com and get that completely free trial. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next time.